Howdy, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Speak Plainly with me, your host, Owl Medicine. And today, we're going to talk about back pain. Back pain sucks. And most people have it in America. Most people will have it. By most people, I mean 80% of the population at some point in our lives are estimated to experience low back pain. That's a lot of people. And low back pain is not a genetic condition. This is not something that just your dad had a low back or had a bad back, so now you're going to have a bad back. That's not the way that works. There might be some inheritance from your lifestyle choices that affect that, but your back pain, you've got a very, very, very small chance that it's genetic, which means it's pretty much within your control. But if it's in our control, then why do 80% of people still have back pain? Especially when you consider that there are cultures in the world that have little to no back pain, like maybe 5%, as little as 5%, according to some studies that have been done. So there's one woman who's done a lot of cool science about this, that kind of pioneered this whole J-shaped versus S-shaped spine thing that we're going to get into about this low back pain. So for me, low back pain in general, is very real and very firsthand. I'm a military guy. I grew up in a military family. Let me rephrase that. I'm not a military guy. I served in the military for 6 years, 2 months, and 1 day. I come from a military family. My father was military. His brother was military. Every male, my brother, both of my grandfathers, every male in my family, even in my extended family, we all join the military. And that's just what men do. I remember my grandfather telling me that it'll teach me how to be a man. And apparently part of being a man is having non-specific low back pain. Because that's what you get from the military. Everybody gets non-specific low back pain at some point, and usually it winds up becoming chronic by the time we hit middle age. There's quite a few reasons for this. The first and foremost for me is, since I was a little kid, I've been told, sit up straight. And coming from a military family, that's very much that's just part of it. It's part of the way you present yourself. It's part of how you hold yourself, is a part of who you are, and you want to present yourself in a certain way, and all that's good and fine, whatever. But sitting up straight, what actually happens when somebody says, sit up straight, you don't actually sit up straight. Your spine doesn't become more straight. What happens is you compress a certain part of your thoracic spine in an effort to make yourself taller. And you hyperextend the front of your spine, lifting your rib cage, and you gain a little bit of height, and you injure your back if you do that over time. Because we talk about posture all the time, and we talk about posture like it's a thing, but it's not a thing. Not in the definition that I have, that I work for posture. Because posture is a thing like the economy is a thing. It's a concept, and the concept of posture is okay, when you have seated posture, you have standing posture. Posture is basically whatever position that your body takes when it is erect or partially erect and simultaneously at rest. If you want to fix your posture, you don't adjust how you sit while you're seated. If you would like to fix your posture, the way that you do that is by moving more, because your posture, seated or standing, is an amalgamation of all of the movements that you do and don't do throughout the day, and the resting tension or laxity that is created by your movement or immovement of certain pieces of your body, and all together comes to form you and what your architecture looks like in a seated or standing position. And that's what posture is. So when we talk about posture, we're really missing the mark, because we're pretending that there is a correct position for the body to be in. And there's not a correct position. The correct position for your body to be in is movement. That's the correct position that we're meant to be in. And guess what we don't do when we're sitting down? You don't move. The reason we sit down is because we're tired of moving. And the reason we're tired of moving is because we always sit down. So the posture piece is a lot of what Esther Gokhale talks about. She's the acupuncturist scientist who did some research into these indigenous populations that she found and heard of that didn't have much back pain. And she visited Indonesia and Ecuador and I think Honduras and India. She went to many places in Africa and South America to observe cultures that report very little back pain, because she wanted to know what they're doing differently. And the reason she got into it is because she had her own issues with back pain. She had sciatica and some L4-S5 issues, and wanted to fix it, and was really trying to figure out how. And that's what led her down this road. For me, my back pain came from being in the military, and from the time I was a kid, being told to stand up straight, stand up tall. Also, I'm 6 foot. Well, if you measure me when I'm standing up straight, I'm like 6'1", and I'm the shortest male in my family. Like my brother, my father, most of my cousins are all considerably taller than me, and I'm not exactly short, yet I still have a little bit of this, like, I guess, short guy syndrome of constantly being told to stand up straight. And the idea of how you look when you stand up straight, the pride, the self-assuredness that comes from standing erect and standing tall and that sort of thing becomes... Well, for me, it became a bit of a goal, because it was an expression of my autonomy, an expression of my ability to control myself. And so I kept doing that thing posturally. And like I said, it's a bad idea. You can't fix your standing posture by standing. You can't fix your seated posture by sitting. There are things that you can do to like help make it not worse when you're doing those things. But if you want to actually change it in the long term, you need to change the way that you move, how much that you move, and the variety in which you get your movement. I found Esther after I had this really cool experience with a couple of friends of mine that I talked about a couple of episodes ago, and I will link back to those episodes so you can check that out. But what happened is I was walking down the road with a couple of friends. And I realized that we had a road with no cars on it. No cars could come. So I couldn't trip. And I had two friends. One was able to stand on either side of me. And I was like, hey, would you guys mind if we like walked a little slower? And I closed my eyes and you can kind of be on either side of me. And we did a couple miles that way. And for like the first 45 minutes, I kept losing my balance. It was funny, but it's expected, right? Because we are visual creatures and we get a lot of our information from the visual world and our visual systems. We understand where the horizon is and that seems to help calculate gravity and our own position in space. So we get a lot of visual input. By cutting that off, my body had to adjust. And because I wasn't able to view my external world, suddenly the only sensory experience I was able to have was somatic. I had to rely entirely on my proprioception. And your proprioception being your awareness of your body in space. what happened is about that 45-minute mark, I bent my knees a little bit more. My pelvis shifted. It tucked a little, and my ribs dropped. And suddenly, I stopped losing my balance. Suddenly, I stopped like meandering to one side and shoulder bumping my friends who were kind enough to walk with me as I was doing this little weird experiment. And it was crazy because suddenly I felt strong. I felt secure. I felt grounded, which is something that I don't do. I feel centered. I very, very rarely feel grounded. I'm a very fiery person. So when people talk about that like solid grounded feeling, I don't know what that feels like. Not very often. I do get centered, and that's my version, but I felt very grounded in the rest of that walk. And I actually didn't open my eyes because it was so fun and it felt so good and I was getting so much out of it. I didn't open my eyes for a couple of hours, and I didn't open them until the road ended because the river washed it out, and we had to take a side path up and around through the woods, and I was definitely going to trip and fall if I did that. So I sadly opened my eyes and finished the exercise and moved on. But that really made me think about all this stuff. It made me reflect on my military experience. It made me reflect on the being raised in a military family and the stand up straight thing, because it turns out I'm much more functional if I'm not standing up straight, which ties into a whole thing of it's much more functional to just kind of be in a relaxed position than it is to be presenting an air, which essentially is what the stand up straight, have a good posture, always have an erect spine. For me, that's much more about having an air about you. It's about having a certain aura or putting out a certain energy. So that experience radically changed my relationship to my body. And I already had a good relationship with my body. I got out of the military and I would switch to barefoot shoes in the military. I even got my whole clinic on barefoot shoes. And I've always been very interested in the human body. That's why I studied acupuncture and medicine and osteopathy, and these things were really cool, but there was something so personal about that experience. It wasn't anything I read in a book or learned from a teacher. It was something that just happened from a random experiment. And there's no better way to learn. There's no better way to learn than just to fuck around and find out. That is my all-time advice to most people. If you get nothing from me, at some point I'm probably going to tell you, fuck around and find out. If you don't know, then go fuck around and find out. That's what it is. Just go figure it out. Try something and go for it. If you don't know what decision to make, sometimes it's about just making a decision and sticking with it. And if you don't like it, you can change it later. But the somatic experience made me completely rethink posture. And I harp on somatic experiences a lot because one of the important factors behind whether or not a event makes it into long-term memory is just the overall total number of neurotransmitters in the body. If you have a big reaction to something, positively or negatively, then you're going to remember that much longer, and you'll probably remember it more accurately. It'll still be inaccurate because that's memory. However, the statement still stands. Profound somatic experiences are what allow us to remember stuff. And we learn things all the time, but we don't know them. I have a very specific definition for learning and for knowing. You can learn something and it goes into your head. When you know something, it goes into your heart. When you learn something, you can recall that thing. When you know it, it affects your reactions to things, like your immediate reactions to things, which means it's a part of you. So what I now know because of that day, what I learned that day that is now transferring into knowledge, is that the best functioning, the best architecture, the best structure, the best form that my body can take to function well, it is not the posture in which I move through the world most often. And that's funny. It's funny that I would rather that, like, it's me and most of the world, it seems, most of the Western world, America at least, we would rather continue holding ourselves a certain way and presenting a certain thing than solve our back pain. Because Esther Gokhale, she showed us that there are people and there are places in the world with less than 5% of the population having back pain. So in her work, what she did was go watch and observe these indigenous cultures with little to no back pain. And she observed quite a few things. The main ones that I'll talk about today are, she observed that they didn't have S-shaped spines. They have J-shaped spines, which sounds weird. You and I and Esther were all told that we have S-shaped spines, we being the human species. And S-shaped from a sagittal view, from a profile view from the side. There's it goes a little forward, it goes a little back, it goes a little bit forward again in the low back, and then it comes back for the sacrum. Well, turns out that that's an adaptation from our lifestyles. Because when you look at indigenous populations or just populations with little to no back pain, they don't have that low back sway. Their backs are fairly erect, and when they take steps, they take a step and their glutes work. I don't know about you, but until I did this experiment, when I would walk, my butt didn't squeeze. I didn't use my glutes very often, unless I was walking a really, really long way, which, I mean, only happens once in a while. So I didn't use my glutes when I walked. They use their glutes when they walk every time. And when they bend over to pick up something heavy, there is no bend over and pick it up and use your knees. There's none of that. Everybody hip hinges. And by hip hinging, I literally mean, you know those like weird little ostrich things that like they just go on a desk and you can touch the head and it like bends forward and puts its nose in a little like shot glass thing of water and then stands back up and comes back down and stands back up. That's a hip hinge. When you're standing up erect and you bend over at the waist and your low back stays straight. The only part of you that's moving is your hips, your femur, and your abdomen, your rib cage are coming closer together while your spine remains erect. That's a hip hinge. That's how they do everything. Like these women who spend like 6 to 10 hours harvesting oysters and seagrasses and things every day. They spend hours and hours and hours a day standing in ankle and knee deep, like wading water and collect food. If their backs were bent that whole time, or if they were trying to use their knees the whole time, they would be totally screwed. They couldn't do it. But they are able to because they have that J-shaped spine, because they have a functionally shaped spine for their life. Their spine is shaped by their movement in the same way that I was talking about. You can't fix your standing posture or your seated posture by adjusting the way that you stand or adjusting the way that you sit. If you truly want to change your posture, you need to change the way that you move, the way that you live. These people live in a way that has allowed them to maintain the structural integrity of the J shape of their spine. And that is correlated with having very, very little back pain. So, I mean, really, that's what I wanted to tell you is that there are cultures in the world with little to no back pain. And there's stuff that we can learn from them that can help us to eliminate our own back pain. There's also there's the Gokhale method, where I think it's 6 classes. She teaches you, like, in a series, essentially. She teaches you how to, like, elongate your spine, how to do hip hinges, and how to do a few of these basic movements safely. That way you can go from the spine that you have now to a more functional, more J-shaped one, as quickly and efficiently as possible while reducing the risk of injury. She puts all of her information out there for anybody for free who wants it. There are interviews on YouTube, and she teaches classes that she's recorded videos of and put them up online, teaching people basically almost every step of her method. But if you'd like to take it in sequential order, you can do that with her. Back pain is not a genetic condition, not 99% of the time. It's due to the back pain that we have is due to our everyday choices. And some of those choices are made culturally by virtue of the height in which we build chairs. But you still get the choice of sitting on a chair. You can sit on the floor. You can do yoga, or you can not. You can go to the gym and work out, or you can not. Oh, I mean, really, you and me, we were all forced to spend like years of our lives in chairs. At school, in cars, at home, we spend like almost our entire life in chairs because sitting is easier than standing. But your body adapts to whatever it is that you do the most. And if you're sitting down the most, then your body is going to adjust itself. Your posture, your seated posture, is going to adjust itself to make it efficient at sitting. Since sitting is a very low demand position for the body to be in, your body gets used to having very little demanded of it. And that's why working out and doing all the stuff is really hard. Your body is used to doing next to nothing. Like all of us, even people, they used to separate people into active and sedentary, and now they have a new label that's like active sedentary. And the idea was that either people were active or they were sedentary. But turns out that with some new, better science and looking closer, only like with those active people, they only spent the most active people, sports players and all that, they only spent 4% of their day being actually active. And they spent the rest of their day being sedentary. So that's really not a functional way to look at it. It's not a matter of active versus sedentary. It's the total sum of all of the movements that you get throughout your day that affect your posture. And we sit for so long that it's like our body adapts to what it needs to do in that seated position. So what does it need to do in that seated position? Really, all it's trying to do now is like stabilize our rib cage over the pelvis. And that doesn't take much work when you're sitting down and there's nothing pushing you from side to side and you're not moving anywhere, so there's no balance to maintain. Those muscles can just kind of chill because gravity's doing a lot of the work. It just because you're not going anywhere, so those muscles don't have to do much. And those muscles, since they don't have to do much, they grow weak. And over time, the muscles grow weak, so weak that even when you do call on them, they aren't able to do the thing that you need them to do. And that's when you go, oh, I can't do that. Whether that's like lifting your knee to your chest, you go, oh, I can't do that because your muscle is too weak. After your muscles become too weak, eventually the signaling pathway to the muscle becomes too weak. And then we go from that's too hard to I can't. And any chronic condition that lasts over 6 months, whether that be pain, like non-specific low back pain, or immobility because your arm was in a cast, anything that you are exposed to chronically for 6 months automatically becomes a neurological condition. And this is the reason it becomes a neurological condition. It becomes a neurological condition because the signaling pathways to those muscles atrophy. The same principle that we have of like use it or lose it with our muscles, like you have to work your biceps in order to have big, strong biceps. The same is true for our nerves and our brain. Once those muscles get tired, then our nerves do the same. And they're like, well, nobody uses me anyway. And even if they do use me, the guy at the end, that muscle over there is so damn flabby. What's he going to do? He ain't going to do nothing. So even if it gets that signal, there's a good chance that signal is going to deaden and not provide much of a response in the body because of the years and years of doing the same thing over and over and over again and sitting in our chairs. So this is how we injure ourselves. The muscles become weak, the signaling pathways become weak, and then as we're like doing something normal, like this is in the military clinic, this was everyone's back pain story. Well, I was picking this thing up and I went to pick it up and lift it and turn. It was always the lifting and turning at the same time. People can't handle the standing up and turning. They can't handle the lifting and turning, that shearing force. There's the expansion in the front of the spine when you go to stand up. There's the compression in the back of the spine if you've bent your back at all. And then there is the rotation of going either left or right. And those shearing forces are a totally new set of forces to your body if all you do is sit. If you don't sit and at least try to turn from left to right once in a while, that mechanical input of the turning of your vertebrae on top of those discs, that prepares the discs to be able to tolerate that force. In the same way that using the signaling pathways to flaccid muscles, you have to use those signaling pathways to strengthen them. It's true in every single aspect of our biology. Use it or lose it. That is your biology. Every single bit of it. If you don't use the elasticity in your cardiovascular system, well, you lose the elasticity in your cardiovascular system. If you don't use the muscles in your legs, you will lose the muscles in your legs. And anyone who's had big surgery or a major reconstructive surgery knows and understands that there's a lot of muscle mass. If you've just been injured for any extended period of time, you know that there's a lot of muscle mass that's lost because everything in biology is use it or lose it. The brain is nothing but efficient. The body is nothing if not efficient. So we have to use it or lose it. And that's what's happening with our backs. We have to use it or lose it. Use your back or lose the function of your back to back pain. Like, okay, I'm not telling everybody to go out and start deadlifting right now. That's not the concept. You should know your limits to some degree. Talk to a professional who can help you figure out what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, and safely move you from where you are to where you would like to be. But ultimately, use it. You have to use your back. You have to attempt. The final thing I'll say about this is going back to the glutes. When we're sitting, we have this gluteal amnesia. We sit so long, it's uncomfortable. It's painful. Like, watch any child in kindergarten and first grade and see how well they sit in a chair for 8 hours. It's not well. They don't do it well at all. And you know why? Because it's uncomfortable. It's not what human beings were meant to do. Yet we still force our children to sit for hours and hours and hours and hours a day, knowing scientifically that it's terrible. It's absolutely horrible for us. But hey, we'll make good factory workers. We'll make good slaves for capitalism. So let's just keep on trucking. But I digress. we don't do well in these seated positions. That's why we develop this gluteal amnesia. We lose our proprioceptive awareness to our lower body. And that's what that walking experience did for me, was it brought me so keenly into my body because I didn't have my external representation of the world, my visual representation. I had to get all of my information from just my own somatic experience. That is what changed it for me. Having to get all of your information from yourself is a profound experience. It's why people travel alone. It's what makes thought leaders. It's what makes a guru in most places. A lot of the gurus now that are on YouTube and whatnot will tell you that they never learned anything from anybody. Everything that they know came from their own personal inner experience. And that's a perfectly valid way to understand the world. And I learned that firsthand in that walking experience where I was able to find my lower body. And since then, I have been actively working every day on building my connection with my lower body and just trying to be aware of my spine and that sort of thing. Because coming out of the military, especially coming out of the honor guard, I had some real back pain. I had back pain with neuropathy for a few years. Got a diagnosis for it from the military. So the back pain thing is real, and it is our fault. It's within our control. It's our culture's fault. It's our individual fault. But really, fault is just like the approved place that we can place blame. And blame is nothing but the discharge of pain. So if you already have pain, you're not physical pain from this, you're not going to be able to discharge that pain. It's there. So there's no reason to look for someone to blame, but there is plenty of reasons to look for ways to fix it. We've covered a few of them today. You can look up the Gokhale method. We can focus on hip hinging. You can really stretch your soleus, the calf muscle. If there's only one muscle in the entire body that you stretch, I would say make it the soleus. But there are things that we can do. There are things that we can do here, today, right now. Go do, you can do some yoga, do some stretching, engage your back. Make sure that you're not hyperextending that low back, and you're not overarching your low back. That's something that our culture does now, and it's a sexy thing. It's kind of a mating position, and we have lots and lots of free time to do lots and lots of mating, and it's very sexy. So I think that actually, believe it or not, has something to do with it as well. Maybe in certain demographics more than others, but still. The point of today's episode was to introduce you to this brand new concept for a lot of folks. So many Americans specifically, we have just kind of accepted the reality that we have and will continue to have back pain. And that if we don't, that we will relatively soon. And that's just the way the world is. That's part of aging. I'm here to tell you, it's not. It is not a necessary part of aging. It is not death. It is not taxes. You can't get away with life without those two things, unless you're a major corporation. Then you can actually pay negative taxes and just get handouts from the government constantly. But if you're a regular person, you're going to die and you're going to pay taxes. But you don't have to have back pain. And that's the whole idea today. So get excited. Back pain sucks. Pain in general sucks. But a lot of this is actually within your control. We may be a little screwed over because of our past. We may be a little screwed over because of our culture, but we totally got this. I've fixed my back pain. I know lots of people who have fixed their back pain with lots and lots of different methods. So try it. At least don't lose hope. Okay? I think it's pretty cool that there's chunks of the world with zero back pain. That's so neat to me. But I'm kind of a nerd. Anyway, if you've made it this long, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I've had a lot of fun. This is a great fun topic for me to cover. So I hope that you have a marvelous day and you feel a little excited about the future. Okay? Stay blessed, y'all.